Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Autin, Director of Research Programs at Zpryme, and I am joined today by Mike Bates, the General Manager of Energy at Intel. Thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me.
So Zpryme will be hosting an event coming up in a couple weeks, December 3rd, in partnership with Intel, the Industrial Solution Builders Fall Utility Event. And so we'll get into that in a bit. One of the things we'll be discussing at that event is how intelligent substations are an inflection point for flattening the grid. So my first question for you is, when we talk about flattening the grid, what exactly does that really mean?
Well, first of all, what it means for us is a way to describe and illustrate the changes that are underway in the utility energy system from, centralized power and not physically downhill, but one-way flow of electrons to point of consumption. And in the past, of course, when more consumption was needed, more power plants were built. And that day, I think it's hard to argue that it's not over. And the new model is one that features, distributed, hundreds of thousands and, millions of distributed devices on the complete other side of the grid. Our idea is that if you have a way through technology to move that from a one-way flow to a more two-way flow, where the highest and best use electron can be consumed by the market and let the market decide what the highest and best use electron is: green, clean, cheap, time of day, whatever. But there's no barrier to that electron being consumed around those rules. And then it doesn't matter. And I mean, it doesn't mean that gas goes away, because I think that at some points, and probably a lot of points, the highest and best use is the gas generated electricity. So it really does help open up the market, I think, and unlock that supply chain if you can put intelligence out onto the system. And we believe that intelligence resides in the substation as becoming the inflection point. So the substation and the platform developed and compute platform that's installed in the substation allows for real-time monitoring of all those loads on the other side of the substation, and then can operate even locally with AI and data capabilities at the edge to automate some of that load balancing. So we think to really open up the market and for cities, states, companies to meet the renewable energy mandates and carbon emission mandates that are out there, and some of them are very aggressive. We think that to get to the next level, we need to move the grid to more compute at the edge to allow that flattening, again, so that any electron, no matter where it comes from, gets consumed by the market.
And a lot of that will include, yeah, that makes sense for sure. A lot of that will include adding renewables and other distributed resources, like you mentioned, to the grid. So what role do those distributed resources play into digitalizing substations and optimizing that distribution grid?
So I think there's a very technical answer to that, which is what are we doing by putting more computing in the substation, and what does that deliver that is not delivering today? So I think the best way I can describe it is, and being from the sales side, it probably, hopefully I won't butcher this too badly, but the idea being to, with an open platform at the edge, consolidate all those workloads that are there. Then, some workloads that already exist, and then the vast number of workloads that will be introduced in the future that didn't exist today and didn't exist when the grid was built. So EV charging, tracking EV charging, solar energy, energy storage. There's all these new workloads that the utility and the grid will be collecting. And if you can put the compute at the edge and combine all those workloads in a more traditional compute platform, then you get to leverage those analytics in a way that you weren't able to leverage them before. And if you're getting real-time, low latency monitoring of those new workloads, and you can deploy, AI and machine learning to then learn how to balance a system in the way that we think it's going to need to be balanced as more and more of these distributed loads get deployed on the edge.
And you mentioned when we were chatting before that, that's going to open the door for some new service models for utilities to offer. So what do you see some of those service models looking like?
It's, I guess I'm showing my age a little bit, but I go back to, what happened back in the telecommunications transformation back, I don't know how many years that was. We moved from, Southwestern Bell to the multiple telecom providers. What happened back then, all those companies that built that infrastructure, all that broadband infrastructure, the traditional incumbent telecoms, were not necessarily the ones that made the money from that investment in the infrastructure. So, the Googles and Amazons, those are the companies that developed services that were delivered off of that infrastructure. So I think the same opportunity exists in the market today. Once you modernize the grid and perform in the ways that we talked about before, the grid then becomes a platform for the delivery of those services. So I guess the utility can be the middleman in that transaction and take some revenue or some value from the ability to offer those services, and then someone else goes to the customer and offers them. Or the utility can also get into that market. And I know it's not as simple as the way I'm describing. There's a lot of regulation and legislation and policy that sometimes you got to thread the needle or change policy. But I think that opportunity exists today in the market that hasn't existed since I've been in it. And I think COVID may have even expedited some of that change. So I think, services like, tracking your EV and your EV charging services and selling a service as opposed to selling the commodity of the electron that charges your electric vehicle, or utility partnering with a company like, a Shell that's doing retail EV charging and having a branded program. So I could go on forever, but there are lots of opportunities out there that I think the utilities can get in front of and intercept some of the value.
Yeah, so you work a lot with utilities in your role. What are some of the challenges that they've faced moving in this direction? And then maybe you can expand a bit on the opportunities that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think everyone would probably answer that with a regulatory model. And I think that's probably true. It's probably, if I would say, the most friction from moving from how utilities operate and engage their customer today and how they might engage their customer in the future. But I think as a symptom of that is also just how utilities are structured. So utilities are structured, and their skills and expertise are around reliability of service. Experts on engineering and engineering systems for reliability, as well as putting enough technology out to be able to monitor revenue and billing. So those are key ones. But I think now the utility is being asked to do something very different, which has become a heavy engineering grid reliability focus to now have a customer and even new revenue generation type of business. So I think there's this institutional momentum around utilities and the way they were built in the business model before that slows down some of that innovation. I think it's changing a lot, and I think the market is kind of forcing it to change. And there are some utilities that you can point to that are doing a really great job of seizing the opportunity. But it's hard to get out of that momentum and then move an organization into something that's evolving like this.
Yeah, and when the industry is changing so much and so quickly, what happens when utilities don't capitalize on these new business model opportunities, or what sort of threats do you see?
Yeah, we talked about this a little before. This is I would have answered this question very differently if we did this interview in January. But what I think we've seen through COVID is it kind of expedited the pain points the oil and gas companies are having around that model. And one is, the carbon impact. of oil and gas. I think there's now a financial risk for holding high carbon assets, and I think Wall Street is starting to signal that. I think obviously there's a groundswell at the community, state, government level around carbon footprint, and I think the recognition in the last several months from the big oil and gas companies is they see an opportunity in this market. They see an opportunity to move from carbon-based to clean renewables. They see an opportunity to jump into renewable energy production. They see an opportunity to jump into services in this space. So I think the biggest threat I would say today now is those new market entrants coming into this space, seeing an opportunity. And again, I think it's the big oil and gas companies, the ones that I would point to first, that I would really want to, that would be on the lookout for. And again, they're moving into areas that sometimes utilities have a difficult time to move into: consumer services. How much, if you're a regulated utility, how much profit can you make off your capital expenditures? So there's a lot of nuances that does hold utilities back from fully engaging. But I hope that, we figure this out. And I think, again, because if you think about it today, if you're a consumer, the brand you think of for some of these services that we're talking about is still, I think, the utility. And I think utility still has an opportunity to extend that brand into these new services.
And so there are so many stakeholders and players in this industry, and especially when we're moving towards decarbonization, digitalization. So switching gears a little bit, but it's somewhat in the same vein, Intel has their Industrial Solution Builders Coalition, which is what our event will be focusing on coming up December 3rd. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the coalition. How are all of these stakeholders coming together? How are they collaborating? What sort of things have you seen come out of the coalitions in the past?
Well, you use the word collaboration. I think that's the one thing that's come out of this. It's been an interesting journey. We started with these utility coalitions, and we have coalitions building in other industries as well. But we started in Europe with Iberdrola, which is a utility based in Spain. On the challenge of remaking the grid, as we've talked about on the beginning of this interview, in a way that allows them to integrate these distributed energy resources that are getting deployed in the edge. And they recognize that their substation architecture needed to be upgraded. So we went on a journey with them, and we've got other utilities joining. We're hopefully be announcing that at the event, on the development of a new approach, a new solution architecture and platform approach for modernizing the substation. And the reason why these utilities leaned in with Intel was they saw an opportunity with Intel to convene the ecosystem around these new solution architectures. They were somewhat frustrated, I think, working in the traditional technology upgrade and TikTok of improving and modernizing the grid. It wasn't happening in the way they wanted and maybe the pace they were looking for. So Intel being a technology agnostic company, the term I heard when I first joined Intel was the rising tide floats the Intel boat in areas where more compute is needed. So we're not actually selling anybody's particular solution. We're trying to take the tools and capabilities that Intel can bring and help this industry create the platform they think they're needed. And then the ecosystem has, comes to that approach. So that's what Industrial Solution Builders is all about. It's working with our customers that are looking for a new approach to a shared challenge. And of course, in this industry, the shared challenge that this isn't just in Europe, but it's globally, is remaking the grid in a way that allows for full optimization of renewable loads and distributed loads on the edge of the grid.
Great.
So yeah, just a quick commercial. I mean, we've got a great panel on the first half of that. That's the utilities that have joined us with the substation automation platform approach in Europe. someone from Iberdrola, as well as an executive from Enedis, which is a utility in France. And then the second half of the session is featured on North American utilities. We have 4 North American utilities join us: Salt River Project, Southern California Edison, Entergy, and American Electric Power, to share their stories as well. So, and finally, we'll have an update. Hopefully, the election results are all clear by December. We'll have an update on some of the stimulus funding we think is coming out of DC, as well as the green energy deal in Europe as well.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing some of those case studies, getting more in depth about what everyone's doing at the event. Again, that's the Industrial Solution Builders event coming up on December 3rd, hosted by Zpryme and Intel. We'll put a link up so everyone can register for that event. It will be a free registration. And Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
No, Erin, I just really do appreciate the time, and just would say it's a great time to be in this business. No matter what your intention and passion is, it's a market going through unique disruption and innovation, and a great opportunity, not for big companies like Intel, but I think also for a lot of innovators that are looking for ways to engage. So anyway, looking forward to seeing everybody at our event in December.
Well said. I definitely agree, and looking forward to seeing you and everyone else in December. Thanks, everyone. We will see you soon.